Hey, welcome back, everyone. Lovely to see you all, as always. I am joined by a really incredible guest this week, Philip Targon, who was the previous chosen chief elect of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids for, I think, a little over nearly 30 years now, I think, and has really been credited with expanding the Order's teachings internationally. So we are here, obviously, to talk about Druidcraft and seasonal cycles and all this kind of interesting thing, which I know a lot of you have been asking me for over the past couple of months, I guess we should say, but it's always its own thing. But Philip, thank you so much for coming on. It's wonderful to have you.
Hi, Chris. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here.
Brilliant. So yes, I was giving people a very brief introduction to you there. But for people who maybe aren't familiar with you, or even maybe aren't familiar with OBOD, can you talk a little bit about your background and who you are, I guess, and how you came into, I guess, modern Druidry, I guess we can say.
Yeah. I suppose. Well, I suppose you could say that, being born in that generation after the war, so I was born in 1952, 7 years out of the Second World War. I mean, it took me a long time to realize how close that is to the end of a war. When you're growing up, you sort of don't realize it. But when you experience or you hear of wars, in more recent times, and you see how their effects echo on, I say it wasn't until my late 30s that I realized I suddenly sort of took on board the impact of being born so close to the end of the Second World War. The bomb sites around and it's still very much present. You'd go to France on holiday and you'd see the marks of German shells on walls and things. And so that was a time of kind of upheaval, which really sort of shook everything up in the collective and moved into the second, after the Second World War, into the sort of beatnik era, which in the 50s, which moved to sort of flower power and all the rest of it. So I was a kind of child of that generation, so the two big influences on me really were the psychedelic era, I suppose, and this fascination for magic and alternative spirituality, and so those sort of forces, combined with the fact that my dad was very interested in psychoanalysis. We had a lot of friends with psychoanalysts, so the sort of psychology was very important to me, and they all sort of conspired really to me being interested in. And I met when I was young, when I was 11, I met the old chief druid who my dad knew. And so these influences all conspired to sort of make me who I am, I suppose, and interested in psychology, magic, mysticism, altered states of consciousness, and so on. I'm not sure if that answers the questions, but
yeah, absolutely. So I guess this makes sense. I guess if we're getting into your experiences with Druidcraft as well, right? So I guess because you trained under Ross Nichols, right, who was the I guess the founder, or in a way, I guess kind of. No, yeah, founder is, I guess, the right word, right? Of OBOD, or the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids.
Yeah, he started. He was the member. He was a friend of Gerald Gardner, who was the sort of founding father of Wicca, you could say, and some people might say the inventor of. Other people might say whatever. That's another whole subject. But he was a friend of his, and they were both. Gerald Gardner, funny enough, little sort of quirk of history. Gerald Gardner was a member of the ancient Druid order. He was a Druid, and he invited his friend Ross Nichols to join the Druids. So Ross Nichols joined the Druids, and then what happened is Ross felt more attached to it, as it were, than Gardner, and was involved in it for some time. And then the old Druid chief died, and there was a split, the usual sort of schisming thing. And Ross founded his own order, the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, in 1964. And that was actually the year that I met him. Got to know him, or just before, perhaps maybe I met him the year before when I was 11. And anyway, so that's the story. Yeah.
So I guess in that sense, then, because it seems like sort of the neo druidry craft, it's sort of being expanded to a certain extent. it diverges from Wicca quite extensively, although I've seen various commentators sort of draw parallels between sort of modern Wicca and Wiccan ceremonial practice or Wiccan ritual and things and Druidic ritual. So I guess for you in your experience, how do the two kind of diverge? So what are the differences between Druidcraft and Wicca?
Yeah, exactly. The difference really is the similarities. First of all, I think are this this desire to connect to the pre-Christian influences, the inspiration of the pre-Christian past, a desire for something more magical. So there's an interest in magic as well as mysticism. So sort of earth-centered, nature-based, magically based, inspired by the pre-Christian era, by paganism, and having this threefold initiatory structure, which again, some people suggest that Gardner was inspired by that from his experience of Freemasonry, but actually a threefold sort of initiation pattern feels very archetypal, and so Druidry has that too. Bards, Ovates, Druids. The use of the circle, the four elements, the four directions, and so on. And so those are all similarities. And then the other big similarity is in the use of working with the eightfold wheel of the year. So when Ross and Gerald Gardner were in the ancient Druid order, they celebrated the summer solstice and then the two equinoxes. Summer solstice at Stonehenge, and then the two equinoxes at Parliament Hill in London and Tower Hill, but the two guys, together, they became interested in, together with their female counterparts and great colleagues, Doreen Valiente in the Wiccan world, Vera Chapman in the Druid world. They basically filled out the scheme and developed rituals for the winter solstice. And they sort of went their own way with that. So the Wiccan ones are different to the Druid ones. And where they diverge, the differences are that Druidry has this whole bardic strand in it. So that one of the key themes in Druidry is art and nature. Art and nature. So there's a big stress, coming out of the whole Eisteddfod tradition in Wales of arts festivals and music and song and poetry and all the rest of it. Put very crudely, I suppose, and without nuance, there's more art in Druidry than in Wicca. Or rather, this, I don't not quite sure how one would put that, but there's more stress in it. It's an integral component of it. There's what else? The magic in Druidry is different, I would say. That all these kind of comparisons and contrasts are obviously very sort of rough, but leave out the nuances and people who mix the two. There are loads of people now who mix the two, so it renders.
Well, it's one of the things I think I always love about Ogold whenever I see it come up in the news or anything. It's a very kind of eclectic.
Yes.
And anyone from any kind of practice can kind of come in. It's like, and it's one of the things I think that arguably attracts people to it, in that there's no sense of there is a distinct set Druidic mythology that you suddenly have to follow when you come in. It's very embracing of different religious traditions and philosophies. It's very kind of everything.
It is, isn't it? And it's very I'm never quite sure how to pronounce it, but miscible. This word miscible, miscible. Miscible, which is like so in a book I've written called Sikh Teachings Everywhere, I start off with a chapter introducing the concept and using the analogy of cocktail making. That Druidry is like vodka, which sort of mixes with everything. You can Druid, you can be a Christian Druid, you can be a Wiccan Druid, you can be a Buddhist Druid, and so on. So yes, that's true. There isn't a dogma in Druidry. But generally, the magic in Wicca tends to be focused on the reason I'm hesitating, I can see myself getting into trouble with this because I'm making these. So but it's one distinction would be to say it's more similar to folk magic. Folk magic being in order to produce effect, healing, obtaining abundance, lovers.
Sure. Yeah, the typical cunning folk stuff. Yeah,
all the cunning folk stuff. Whereas Druidry, probably you could say, has a tendency to be more like high magic, whose focus tends to be transformation of the self.
Right. Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess you can see it. And I think one of the things that's always interested me about it, because we see it in some traditions of folk magic, and a sense sort of the early 90s and stuff. There has been this movement of traditional witchcraft versus Wicca. That's kind of Tradcraft has kind of come out as a reaction against Wicca, almost saying, oh well, there's a ton of folklore and stuff before Gardner kind of modeled Wicca, all this kind of thing, and now we're trying to revive it and that kind of thing. Yeah. But one of the things that I enjoy, even in my own folk magic practice, is transformate all that sense of transformation and almost homeliness, I guess, is a way I can kind of put it, that comes from connecting to your own land and the culture and the landscape around you. And I guess in a way, the spirit of the land, it's inspired everywhere around it, right? And to me, that's kind of how I guess I would conceptualize kind of the mysteries that we experience through Druidism. Which is, you're connecting to this kind of archetypal land spirit or essence that's kind of there, and you're experiencing it through, and through that you experience a kind of transformation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think homeliness is a very interesting word. It's and it is very much. I mean, there's a way in which, another word for homeliness is one might say is feeling that you're sitting at the hearth. Around the hearth, and in fact, we're developing for the order. It's just going to be opened soon. The Druid hearth to welcome, because hearth is the most amazing term, because it comes from this Proto-Indo-European root meaning fire or warmth. So it's got that immediate attraction, that warmth. It means that the center of the home, the hearth, center of the home, that sense of homeliness. But it also has the word heart in it, and earth, and art. And here, there's such an important.
There's so many links going on. Yeah.
So many links and resonances, and I think one way you can characterize Druidry in the sense of that, and the use of the term homeliness, is that it's an approach that's helping us to come home to our sort of bodies and our hearts and the land beneath us and the world we live in, because it's very easy to feel not at home.
Right.
To feel not at home in our bodies if we're feeling, out of sorts, and not quite at home in our emotional selves because life's tough, and and not at home in the world because the world is extremely tough and difficult to live in. So one of the ways I sort of characterize or sense Druidry working, or one of its benefits, is helping people to feel more at home. When we feel more at home, we're less defensive, we're less spiky, and we're more likely to be of some use in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me. I've been talking with one of my friends recently, in terms of just conceptualizing different philosophies and stuff like this. And this term kept coming up in our conversations recently. It reminds me of what we're talking about here. There was a lot of talk about mysteries and the high mysteries and that kind of thing that we can learn through high magic and all this kind of thing, which is about transformation. But there is often very little talk about, I guess, what the term that came up for us, what we dubbed it, is kind of the living mysteries, almost, which is the kind of it's kind of like what you're talking about, right? It's that sense of it's not even necessarily a secret doctrine or a secret idea. It's just this sense of familiarity and sense of holiness that we feel, and it's the transformation in the essence that gets revealed to us through nature, because I think, especially if we're going more on the magical side of things, if you're looking for people with like modern occultists or practitioners or anything, it's very, very easy for people to get very obsessed with like the grimoires or hardcore rituals and summoning things or doing that kind of thing, and they forget a lot of the time that there are a lot of mysteries and things, a lot of transformations, a lot of ideas that can be gleaned through just living and being out in nature, being out in the land, and just being there and just experiencing, I guess, the cycles and the seasons and that kind of eightfold wheel of the year and all this kind of thing, right? And it articulates this kind of living mystery as opposed to kind of like the high, out there kind of mysteries in general. So
well, that's a very interesting point, you see, because if you think about it, we tend to oppose the concept of familiarity and mystery. So if it's familiar, it's Chris again. It's the street, it's my house.
Right. There's something that gets taken away, right?
Yeah, it's familiar, so it's not mysterious. Something that's mysterious is, come on this £2,000 tour to Egypt to experience the mysteries. Read this massive volume which explains the mysteries of the ancient secrets and so on. But actually, familiarity and mysteries can be sort of intimately entwined. If you think of the experience of love, when you fall in love with somebody, you become more. You have this tremendous sense of familiarity with them, familiarity with this person. They feel so familiar to you. But in the middle of it, there's something incredibly mysterious, and part of the falling in love process is the sort of surrender, the lack of control, because you don't know what's going on, and it's uncomfortable you surrender into this, and so I think that's the real experience of mystery, is when you as you say, you're out on the land, you're in the garden, you're looking at trees or whatever it is, and you get these moments of sort of euphoria or revelation, where the profound mystery of the isness of the thing that you're experiencing is just present to you. And it's very easy for our everyday sort of civilized minds to think, well, big deal. Yeah, you're just talking about, everyday stuff being wonderful. And at one level that's true, but there's something that the relationship between familiarity and mystery is really worth exploring, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me of, I in a way, it reminds me almost of how limited English can be as a language sometimes, especially compared to, say, like Germanic languages, for example, because we use the word to know, the verb to know, we use it to refer to everything, right? Like you're saying that, like when you're falling in love, for example, there's that sense of familiarity that's gathered from somebody, and it's a sense of knowing, right? It like them in an intimate sense, and something by association with it. You're like, oh, well, I know this because I've been near it. It's like if you've known somebody for 20, 30 years, you're like, I know them.
I know them.
Yes. You know how they are, their mannerisms, their being, who they are. And yet we can also talk about knowing in a sense of, oh, well, I know about something, and there's different kinds of knowing. It's like you wouldn't, when you think about it, it's a different kind of familiarity, different kind of knowing. Like you wouldn't, like I wouldn't talk about, like I would use the word know. Like if I would say I know my partner very, very well, that's very different to how I would say, oh, well, I know Druidism. There are two different kinds of knowing.
Exactly, and isn't it interesting how and this is what I think learning language is so interesting, because if you think of it's almost the intonation of how you say it, you can say it in a way that dismisses. Oh yes, I know that. Right,
it's kind of dismissive.
I don't even need to think about it. I know that, and so that's the familiarity, if you like.
Right.
Or if somebody says, I really know that. I've experienced it deep inside. I know what you're talking about. Says, I know what you're talking about. You're empathizing with me, and you really feel you've been there too, kind of thing.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess how I'm conceptualizing it, it's like a way to loop back around what we were saying about the hearth and stuff as well, about this idea of coming home. The ability, I guess, to come home to ourselves and where, that sense of meaning, I guess, that we're looking for, what a lot of people are looking for, is coming back to, I guess, for me, I would often say conceptualize it through the seasons, like understanding how the seasons and the cycle and how you respond and situate yourself in the cycles of whatever landscape and whatever lifestyle and thing you're in. Right. So I think in this kind of way, I guess, and this is something we can talk about, but how can the seasons and I guess the cycles of the land reflect changes and inner changes that are going on within us that help us come home to ourselves.
Yes. Well, that's such a central feature of Druidry, and other approaches too. And it's such a sophisticated model, actually. You know, again, people can say, "Oh, I know that. I know the, spring."
Oh, I know about the seasons. That's fine.
I know about the season. The spring is like beginnings, and Samhain and the autumn equinox things, and that's it. But actually, it's so sophisticated that I'm I don't know where to begin with it in a way, because it's so sophisticated. But you start to get glimpses of it, actually, the sophistication of it when you look at opposite festivals. When you look at the way Samhain and Beltane are these very well-known festivals, Beltane, May Day, associated with sort of mating and coming together and all the sort of full flood of flush of spring, in May, and then the other side of the year, you've got Samhain, which is the time that's associated with death and the ancestors. And you think, well, they've got nothing to do with each other, really. And they think, oh, well, no, actually, they're like intimately related, because we wouldn't have death without sex. Oh, hang on a minute, 90% of the TV scheduling is interested in either sex or death. And topics in books and so on, huge themes. And of course, one is the way into life. That's how we're incarnated, and then we go out through the other gateway. Oh, they both used to. They were celebrated with twin bonfires. You think, oh, that's interesting. Going through the gateway of the two fires into life, leaving through the gateway of the twin fires. Yeah, I forgot what your question was, but
nice. Like, I was going off on these kind of tangents are wonderful. I love it.
Yeah.
Like it's just how we're using the seasons, I guess, to conceptualize these cycles that exist, and how we can kind of internalize those. And I guess, like, to a certain extent, how cycles like that we're seeing externally going continually on, how they can reflect cycles within ourselves as well, and how they can kind of mirror and help us learn about it.
Yes, I mean, I think I'm really interested in the moment at the effects that this kind of work has on mental health, mental well-being, and there's if you go into YouTube and type in Lindisfarne, there's a whole slew of little videos of people who disobey the signs to be very attentive to the tides when they cross over. So they drive in their camper van towards Holy Island, Lindisfarne and Holy Island, and then the tide comes in, and there are these pictures of people, people's caravans getting
stuck and stuff,
getting stuck and all that. So what they've got is they've got a series of markers, great big poles about 15 foot high, all along the road, so that if you do get lost, you can make your way through the water to the other side. And it struck me as a really good image for how the Eightfold Wheel of the Year can help us, in as much as we all need markers to help us go through life, and in conventional society, you've got these it's Christmas and the New Year and I suppose the summer holidays,
right? Like the more secularized kind of holidays.
Yeah, once you've got over Christmas and you're doing
it done,
just looking to when will this, but the Eightfold Wheel of the Year gives this sort of cycle every 6 weeks. You've got something to look forward to. You've got a period of time, all sorts of associations related to each of these festival times that you can meditate on and work with. And I think it can be very helpful to create a kind of structure for people to live through. So when they're going through a difficult time, they know the analogy, for instance, of this time we're going through now, this shedding. I mean, here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're going through this period from and it actually starts at the summer solstice, and then gradually the days
it starts coming back down.
The days getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and then you don't really, the first harvest beginning of August. No, it's not. It's the middle of summer. We're all having a ball. This is great, but actually already the combine harvesters are out, in some of the fields, and then you get the second harvest, the autumn equinox, and then it's got to keep going. The stuff's got to keep being shed until you get to the ultimate shedding at Samhain, the end of October, where you die, or symbolically, as it were.
Sure.
Let go like that. and then there's this moment at the winter solstice, the darkest time, and then there's that moment of the rebirth of the year at the solstice, and the cycle begins again. And it's not necessarily that it makes difficulty and letting go any easier, but when you practice, when you work with the Eightfold Wheel of the Year, somehow this cyclical nature of life starts to really sort of resonate with you, and it's perhaps easier to go through hard times.
Yeah, because the way I often conceptualize it, because I'm finding myself more and more actually just like naturally following it, even without trying to, right? Without even being aware of what the seasons or maybe the zodiac sign that astrology is doing or anything like that, or where this wheel of the year is going. I find myself naturally responding to whatever nature is doing at any particular time, and naturally following, customs and practices that are associated with the kind of year. But the way it kind of seems to me is almost like these markers, like they're almost like journey markers, as you said, right? But these markers that we experience, they almost serve as posts to awaken like different archetypes within ourselves as we're kind of moving through the year, and the way it kind of cycles through, and all, whether it's the 8 festivals or whatever it is, they serve a role to kind of awaken these archetypes within us as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's very interesting. So the other thing I would really want to talk to you about would be your work with Druidcraft Tarot as well. And because I think that's also a very useful way of I guess conceptualizing these, like I guess the journey markers in some way, because Druidcraft it is much more kind of focused around the wheel of the year as well. So can we talk a little bit about how that came about? I guess how was that inspired?
Well, how it came about was my remembering a sort of concept that we have in the teachings of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, is to wait 3 days before making an important decision, sometime, if it feels right to you. 3 days being based on this idea of, the triads, the importance of the threefold pattern in Druidry. I was phoned up by the publisher. We'd published the Druid Animal Oracle, and it had been a big success. And they said, "Will you do a Wiccan tarot?" They asked me to create a Wiccan tarot, and my instinctive reaction was to say no. But I didn't. I somehow remembered that, thank heavens. And I said, just give me a few days and I'll get back to you. And I listened, what do you want? I listened to what they wanted and what their ideas were and so on. And then over those 3 days, I let it cook, and I applied another principle of, which you find in the psychology, expressed in the rather dull way of not going for premature closure, is what it's called. In other words, not rushing to a conclusion, really, and not trying to sew it up and get the answer immediately, allowing the sort of uncomfortable uncertainty to sort of bubble away in the cauldron and see what comes out of it. And my rational mind and then the third thing I suppose I did is I inhibited the sort of the override mechanism that my rational mind has. I think of us who've been brought up in the West with all this kind of it's like he thinks he's in charge. The logical, rational guy, because of course he is. It's like a no-brainer. Yeah. I'm in charge because I think in logical sequences, But gradually you learn that, well, actually, there's more than just this logical person there. There's the heart, and there's the irrational side. There's the trans-rational side. There's all sorts of other aspects of the self, and you get into all that left brain, right brain stuff around intuition. Yeah. So what came to me really was that my logical mind said, well, the Druids had nothing to do with the tarot or Wiccan. For a start, there was the Wiccan thing. Well, it couldn't be Wiccan, but it could be Druid craft, because Druidry and Wicca do have these similarities. So maybe they can meet around the tarot, if you like. Maybe that's an interesting sort of focus for them to meet. And then but hang on a minute, the Druids, the ancient Druids didn't. Tarot,
right, so
wrong era.
Actual thinking comes in.
It's the wrong era. It's not. This the tarot is coming from one stream of magical tradition, and Druidry and Wicca another. And then you realize, well, actually, the whole who says, who's making up these boundaries that you're talking about, and B, why not combine them? There's something rather interesting when you get slightly different things being combined. It can be very creative, actually. And then the big insight for me was around how the tarot could be used. One of the wonderful qualities of the tarot is the way it can be used as a way of illuminating different spiritual approaches. So you can have, there are Zen tarots and Kabbalistic tarots and any number of different kind of tarots. So the fact that the question came up for me, what if the tarot, it could actually illuminate both Druidry and Wicca? And sorry,
you're good.
There we go. Let's got rid of it. So that was what. After 3 days, I was able to ring them up and say yes. And then I had a fascinating journey, really exploring how they could come together around the tarot. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So it illuminates, it's a way of illuminating, I guess, both Druidry and Wicca. And for me, it's always one of those really funny things, actually, because I always struggled with tarot a little bit. I don't know what it was, whether it was the Rider White tarots or it was any kind of traditional tarots. I always just really struggled connecting with them. I could get decent enough readings if I was doing divination for other people or anything like that. I could do it, but I never felt super connected to it. As a divination system, it just never really worked for me. Yeah. But ironically, one of my friends gifted me Druidcraft as well. As I started working with it, I was like, this actually this makes a lot more sense to me. It was what's really interesting is even today, it's still the only tarot that I'll use. I don't use any other.
Sorry, I missed the last sentence there.
It's Druidcraft is the only tarot I'll use.
Great. Okay.
It's the only one that in a way feels like it makes more sense to me than other tarots, which sounds interesting, I know, but I can hear the traditionalists and the ceremonial magicians kind of screaming at me for this. But it just for me, it works in the context of the Wheel of the Year, situating it within that context makes far more sense to me because it's almost the tarots are kind of micro journey markers. If we take the wheel as the major journey markers as you go through the year, each of the tarot, whether it's the tarot suites or it's the major arcana, each of them are these kind of micro journey markers that illuminate these aspects of the self that also help you kind of situate whatever is going on within the confines of a certain tide of the year, right? How I experienced it.
Well, that's good. And so you've got the cards with the big book because there's yes. I think because in the book, I managed to convey these concepts in a way that doesn't kind of come across so well in the little booklet that comes. Some people buy the cards and the deck and as a deck with a little booklet, and it doesn't come across quite as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah. So what do you think about this idea, then? I guess that when we're working with a tarot, that all the tarot, it can illuminate these archetypes or these aspects in ourselves in relation to wider cycles, I guess.
Well, what's really interesting, isn't it, is to ask yourself the question, when you're using something like this, is this just random? I mean, is this a selection of images that are evocative in and of themselves, and you could literally pick anyone at random and it would have something to say to you? And that's a convincing explanation. However, my experience of using it indicates that something more is going on, that it's not completely random. And this is where we really enter the realm of mystery. What I mean by this is if you shuffle the cards and instead of if you lay them out and then you get the person who's having the reading to select the cards themselves, and then place them face down, and then they turn them up. For a start, you're avoiding the situation. You can, if you've ever haven't shuffled a deck fully, you can get that phenomenon where, if it's a new deck, for instance, you do it in I've forgotten the way for where you shuffle them in stacks, and you've got the stack, and you end up, then you take 5 off the top, and you find you've got 1 of cups, 2 of cups, 3 of cups, 4 of cups, and 5 of cups, and that's just because you haven't shuffled it enough, and it's so. Whereas if you're picking them out from, it doesn't matter if that's happened, because you're picking them out along the line, and you can get such significant readings that the chances of having that particular combination are so enormous that you can't see how it's random anymore. The other interesting phenomenon is the rogue cards or the wild cards, which sometimes where when you're selecting the cards, one will sort of jump out almost of its own volition, and you learn that that's often really significant. And you put it to one side, and then you do the reading, and then you pick up this random card that's just hopped out on its own, and sometimes it's the sort of clincher, and it absolutely strikes home.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting, and like a part of me, because you were mentioning earlier, like one of the core differences, I guess, between Druidcraft and Wicca is this idea of Druidcraft of focusing a bit more on artistic expression as well, and that the art is also an important aspect of the mystery, or the wider mystery as well, because it communicates certain things. So, because the artwork and stuff in the cards is beautiful, it's gorgeous, right? And what role does the artwork serve in inspiring us or awakening certain things within us when we're going through a reading or going through things as well?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think what happened is Will Worthington, who was the artist who painted the Druid Animal Oracle and the Druid Plant Oracle, and then also this. He paints in tempura. The sort of egg yolk and
right,
rabbit glue derived from rabbits' bones. Very
like traditional craft stuff.
Absolutely, on wood. Painted on wood, and just incredible. And there's a kind of earthiness and a naturalness in those. The furniture. If you sort of look at the furniture that's used, the chairs that people are sitting on, or his sort of attention to details. So you feel as if there's a sort of world there that he's somehow managed to create these windows into this other world, which is very, very sort of earthy and real. I think that's part of a lot of tarot images. I had the real good fortune to spend a couple of weekends with a friend who ran a tarot training school in Holland. And he was a tarot collector, and he had hundreds of tarot decks and hundreds of books on the tarot. And when I was working on creating that tarot, I spent a couple of weekends with him, just going through all these decks and all the images and just soaking them all in. A lot of tarot decks, in my opinion, are sadly rather poor. And there's a reason for that at one level. Which is that, it's not an excuse, but it's perhaps an explanation for the quality of some of the artwork, is that there are, 72 cards.
Yeah. And
publishing contracts are usually a year. A publisher agrees to do something, and then you have a year to come up with the goods. So that's kind of okay if you're writing a book, because a year's quite a long time, and you've also probably been cooking it for years.
Right.
My average books are often the sort of 5-10 year projects, and then you at some point you have this year's contract where you have to really knuckle down and do it. Yeah. But the artist has to come up with 72 images in a year. That's
right. It's crazy.
Very demanding. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I noticed that a kind of breakthrough moment for me with the tarot was another thing I do when I write books is I get all the relevant sort of books that I can find that other people have been written. A, because I don't want to repeat. There's no point in me repeating what other people have said. And B, I want to find out to really immerse myself in the subject. And what I discovered was that I couldn't find anybody who didn't do this. But in all the books I consulted, all the authors would begin by talking about the major arcana, then the pip cards, then the last section of the book would always be the court cards, the 16 court cards. And you could almost feel the author running out of energy by the time, because the major arcana are so powerful because of these powerful archetypes. By the time you get to the court card, they've just run out of steam, and you would just feel it in the book. A big insight for me was, hang on a minute, the tarot is about humans. It's about character. It's about people. It's about souls. There's this typology. There's 16 different kinds of people who are the court cards. Let's do the opposite. Let's start at the beginning. So I wrote about the court cards first as a typology. 16 different kinds of people. What does that mean? And then rather interestingly, one of the most sort of validated personality tests is called the Myers-Briggs Type Inventory.
Right. Yeah.
And it's got 16 personality types. Myers-Briggs found that 4x4 was the way to go. And there's interesting ways you can match them and so on. So let's start where the tarot starts, really, which is with people, these 16 types, and then let's situate them in the Wheel of the Year, as you brought up. The way the suits can be seen to track the Wheel of the Year, and then within that, these extraordinary archetypes functioning through the personalities of the court cards, the 22 major arcana.
Yeah, well, I guess this was kind of another question that was on my mind. Is like, to what extent, I guess, and you're answering it here, right? But like, to what extent do you think we can see these, like the tarot, as almost like their own characters, their own beings that are kind of teachers that we can kind of interact with, and especially if we're situating them in the Wheel of the Year, are they archetypal and representative of like people or spirits or archetypes or forces that are currently occurring in the world that are trying to give us messages for that portion of the year that we're in, I guess,
Well, one of the most powerful ways to work, I think, is to treat the tarot, and in fact, generally, I mean, from this sort of magical, spiritual sort of orientation, one of the characteristics of that orientation vis-a-vis life and the world is to be incredibly respectful of the great mystery, and to take this sort of animist perspective that sees everything as sort of alive. And so seeing the tarot as a living being, if you like. So when I've done sort of tarot training workshops, I've always started off by inviting the participants to sort of enter into a meditation, and for us to address the tarot as a being, and to ask for their blessing and their inspiration, and to create a kind of tarot temple. In that there's an online course that I present with a colleague, Steve Handsome, called Transformation Through Tarot. And in it, we start off, we suggest that you create a sort of tarot temple laboratory study in your imagination, create it however you like. If you like the idea of an old library with tarot images on the wall, or however you want to construct it, or a little bothy in the country, however you want to do it. And that's where you go to sort of work with the tarot. And then you relate to the images. And then if you're in this altered state and you decide to interact with the hermit, or one of the other figures, the high priestess, I think you're going to get more out of it than just treating it as a sort of intellectual exercise.
Right, like rather than thinking they're just kind of just arbitrary cards that you become familiar with, right? They are these kind of archetypes that are communicating certain things to you, and that's it's a really interesting idea. Yeah, I have to try it.
Yes.
But I guess as well, because the other thing that I'm conceptualizing, because like, I guess the two major forces, I guess, that usually exert themselves on the tarot are like astrological correspondences. In Druidcraft, it's also the wheel things, but there's also, I guess, the elements as well, and how things progress through the elements. And I guess that's briefly something that we haven't touched on, which is rather ironic considering it's Druidcraft. But I guess how how do the elements kind of fit into Druidcraft? Like how are they conceptualized as forces, I guess, and I guess through the tarot as well, but mainly in Druidcraft, I guess.
Well, I think it's a very sort of rich field, and we use that when we start the Druid training, and when you do the training of OBOD, the Order of Bards, Ovids, and Druids, and you go into it, from fairly early on, you sort of begin a journey around the elements, and there's a way in which our society has tended to educate us in the realm of air. We might have been very sporty at school and got into doing a lot of sport, but unless we were lucky enough to be, in these sort of younger people who've gone through forest schools and you'd learnt about growing things and interacting with nature, I'm trying to think, if I think back on my education, I don't think we had any interaction with nature.
Yeah, I don't think I did. Like, it's not a thing you see in British schools, really.
Yeah, you just don't interact with the natural world. That's always pretty weird when you think about it.
Yeah.
But you don't. So you're in the realm of concepts. And my sort of memory of my school life was looking out of the window at the sun and the trees, being fantastically bored and unable to really understand why I had to know algebra or, square roots or something like that. It's like I just didn't get it. And so what we do, and in the start of the Druid training, is we take you to the mud, if you like, which is getting involved with earth, which also has these associations with practicality, down to earthness, being real, grounded, which is why it's the sort of corrective to the. People talk about New Age stuff as being woo-woo and airy,
right? Like very kind of ungrounded, I guess. Yeah,
angels and fairies, and only positive thoughts and all the rest of it. Whereas Druidry isn't like that. It brings you down to earth, practical. So we have ceremonies that we do with earth and sort of connecting with the earth and thinking about earthy things and so on, and then moving into the realm of water with the feelings, the emotions, and it's not water first, then you don't plunge people straight into sort of engaging with because you can drown easily, so once you've got some kind of stability with the earth, connecting to the earth, then you can move into engaging at with both the emotions and the sort of psychological correlates of water, but also with water itself, and the the mystery and the extraordinary nature of that, and then only then moving into engaging, with air, and a common experience can be people who never really were comfortable in air. I mean, some of us are comfortable in air, and we're quite, we feel at home.
A very academic kind of conceptual.
Academic people, and enjoy, conceptualizing and reading and so on. But lots of people don't. So it's incredibly sort of reassuring for them to be allowed to feel at home in the earth and water, not hurried along. So again, another thing we do in the training is we don't have a time limit on it. And although you can get through that first level in a year, most people take about 4. But some people take 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and then finally to fire, where it's appropriate that it should be the last, because you can get burnt with fire. So yeah.
Yeah. So what kind of what kind of associations does fire have in the Druid card? I assume, I guess, will, inspiration, maybe.
In inspiration, intuition, enthusiasm, energy, vitality. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess, is that where I'm afraid this is I guess the last sort of major concept I'm going to touch on, I guess, a little bit, which is always comes up in association with Drury, is the idea of the Arwen, which fulfill, I guess, is permeated throughout Druidry to a certain extent.
Yeah.
But I guess is Arwen kind of conceptualized as part of fire, or does it sort of pervade all the elements, I guess?
Well, that's interesting, because these there's this concept of the fire in the head. I'm trying to think of that piece of music. It's from W.B. Yeats, and somebody set it to music. I was listening it to the other day, and I can't get it, but I can just hear it in my mind. So the Arwen can be experienced as fire in the head. When you're on fire with a new idea,
right? So it's kind of like inspirited, almost like the massive.
You're just absolutely on fire with this new passion or idea or whatever. But it can also be sensed, I think, in the watery sense, because Arwen essentially means sort of blessings of the gods. And it's interesting, that because you've got both fire and water are the two elements that are most associated with it, which are the two elements that the goddess Brigid works with, who's the goddess of the forge and of poetry and of midwives. And you think,
I think she's like referred with the hearth as well, isn't she? Like a domestic deity as well.
The hearth, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so you think, well, what's that about? And you say, at one level, the domestic deity in the hearth is like, making soup, absolutely vital function, cooking and all the rest of it, and keeping everybody warm. But at another level, midwifery and poetry and forging, they're all talking about creation, creating things. And this core idea in Druidry around Arwen is that creativity doesn't come from us. It's not arising out of the personality. It's coming from beyond us. So it's coming from the source, if you like, which you might conceive of as, Brigid, or as the cauldron of the goddess, or, however you conceive it. But it comes from there, and then it flows through you, and then you add to it your flavor and your color, and, and give it out to the world. And when you hear about this, it's common for people who do experience creativity. They recognize that quality of creativity seeming to coming from beyond themselves.
Like arises from
it just arises from somewhere. And you'll see interviews with songwriters saying, well, I didn't really write this song, it just wrote itself suddenly one day.
Right. It's kind of things come through, or it's like, I guess, like, do we have is it like a historical concept from Druid, or is it just found more in like the modern Druid stuff?
No, it's a concept that comes from, I'm trying to remember where it first is mentioned. It's certainly mentioned in sort of 12th century manuscripts in Wales. There were the Arwenithion in Wales, these people who were inspired, and the accounts of them show how the fire in the head, how they were, you could even speculate whether these people were having some kind of, breakthroughs, which, could be interpreted as psychotic or inspired, and there's that fine line between the two, and all sorts of interesting relationships between them. But no, it goes back to this, the Welsh concept of our Arwen being this poetic gift. And you have the story of Taliesin, the finest poet in the land, who was gifted with Arwen. Mas in the Irish tradition, there's the story of Finn McCool, who tasted it. Interestingly, they both use their thumbs. Finn McCool, a splash of the Salmon of Wisdom's liquor lands on his thumb, and he sucks it and becomes illuminated. And in Wales, Gwion Bach, a splash from the cauldron of the goddess Gyrydwen splashes on his thumb, and he sucks his thumb, and he's illuminated. So two different stories, but salmon and cauldron different, but saying the same thing, that illumination comes from beyond, from this divine source. Of course, the salmon is swimming in the well, which is the well, is the cauldron, is the goddess, is the earth, is So again, we have that centrality of art within Druidry. You have this sort of nature spirituality, but with art playing this very central role, and the sort of the role of the human, rather than us being sort of not passive and active participants in the natural world, which we are, and our spirituality helping us to open to that, but also actually being co-creative, or being creative, and that we can actually contribute to the world. This extraordinary sort of ability we have that other creatures don't, to create art.
Yeah, so we're almost like, in our way, we are almost like channels for the Arwen, essentially, to come through into the world, right?
Absolutely. It's an extraordinary idea, and one that I haven't seen articulated in other spiritual approaches. I mean, I don't think it's articulated in Wicca. It's not articulated in
I can't think of anything. Yeah.
Established religions in the same way. It's kind of pretty unique to Druidry, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay. So in that case, then we can begin. I guess that's a wonderful place to stop, I guess, and start wrapping up. But I guess in that sense, are there any? I'm curious if there are any for people who are sort of new to engaging with the land in this kind of way. They're new to engaging a kind of more land-based spirituality, because I think it is one of the issues. I mean, I don't necessarily say it's issues, because I don't think there are any issues per se with spiritual paths. But one of the things I see very often is, especially on people who are coming at it from maybe religious standpoints as well, and they're coming into spirituality, there's always this idea that, your spirituality kind of takes you out of the body, or it takes you away to some kind of mystical spiritual plane, or whatever it is, right? So for people who are, I guess, coming to this form of spirituality as a land-based spirituality for the first time, because it is kind of a complete 180, it's a shift, right? I guess because people are used to kind of trying to transcend the body, right? So what are there any kind of, I don't know, meditations, practices, things like that you could recommend to anyone who is beginning this kind of seasonal living or cyclical living based spirituality that helps them come into contact, I guess, with something like the Arwen, for example?
Yeah. And I think you've pointed to an extremely interesting detail here, which is something I think that we're coming sort of historically, more and more people are coming to this point of, as you said, the 180-degree shift, is that religions and spiritualities have tended to focus on up and out. Is in its most extremes, you have, say, the sort of dharmic ideas of overcoming suffering and learning how to not be reincarnated. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, the focus is on, when you die, try not to come back, but if you do, try to come down into a good couple, who will give you a good life, kind of thing. So there are all sorts of ways of trying to make sure you don't come back. And certainly in the monotheistic religions, the idea is, you've only got one shot down here, and this isn't really what it's about. It's about the afterlife, whereas now we're increasingly becoming aware, I think, in large numbers of us, that that's not a helpful way to look at things. And there's an extraordinary book called LSD in the Mind of God, I think it is, by a guy called Christopher Bache, B-A-C-H-E, who's a professor of religious studies, who took 25 high-dose LSD trips at great cost to himself. So this is this isn't a pitch to recommend this at all. But just say that his focus, because he was a professor of religious studies, his focus during his journeys was to try and get to the deepest meaning that he could. And one of the big insights that he got, that, when you read the book, it's very striking and feels very sort of authentic, that's not the nature of reality, that the up and out approaches are not helpful, because that the 180-degree shift you talk about is the most helpful approach, which is, in and down doesn't really say. But having said that, in and down does you asked about practices, and I think the first thing to get is to get the set right, the mindset right, by drawing attention to this issue as you've done. So I think that's a really good place to start. Do you want to go up and out? Okay, well, in that case, follow some other path. But if you want to follow this path, what I'd suggest is it might be interesting for you to try and go down and in, and the interesting thing is, if you literally, in terms of your meditation, if you go down, and by down, I mean literally in your awareness, we tend to find when we close our eyes that the focus of our awareness is in our heads. So that's where we tend to spend a lot of time in our awareness. And we move it down and we drop down into the belly or the heart. The heart is a good place to drop into, the sort of heart space, as people call it, heart space, or down into the belly. And you've gone down and in. But actually, if you start to just breathe there and just open to your sense of being present in that space, what tends to start to happen is that your awareness expands and starts to include your whole body. It's not going away. It's not taking you up and out. It's including. It's encompassing. So your awareness starts to spread out to include your body, and then to include the space around it. And you can sort of keep going just as you focus on your breathing, so that gradually you're aware being, sitting on the earth or being on the earth, and you sense the earth beneath you, and the trees, the forests and lakes, and the oceans. And you can choose to feel your gratitude for being in this wonderful natural world, and your love for it, you're cherishing it. And you can include, and you can start to include other people in that. You can include the animals and all creatures. And at a certain point, I think you get to the sort of limit of how far you want to go with that. You can carry on going and include the cosmos and just keep spreading out and out. So suddenly you're or gradually you're aware of the whole planet, and then the stars and the universe around you and all the planets, and it just keeps going out to the galaxies. You might want to go as far as that and to feel your appreciation of the whole universe, all these sparkling celestial bodies and the suns and moons and so on. And then gradually move back. And then imagine you're coming back now to just the area around you, just to, some woodland and, springs and streams, lakes, forests, and then just coming back, and then just gradually coming back to an awareness of your body, and then back, and then your awareness is back in your belly or your heart. Then you come back out, and then you just sense yourself being seated, present, fully present where you are, here and now. And then when you feel ready, you open your eyes.
Yeah.
And so, when I started talking about that, I wasn't thinking of doing a meditation, but we sort of dropped into a meditative space.
Happens, yeah.
And it probably was only 5 minutes or something like that. But what I found amazing is how quickly, in a way, one can get that sense of being at home in the world, being at home in one's body, to circle right back to the beginning of our discussion about feeling at home. I think a sort of meditations like that, where you're not trying to transcend, but you're trying to actually engage with and feel fully embodied, feel at home in your body, at home in the world around you, at home in the universe, grateful for it, loving it, and then just coming back, I think that's a nice way perhaps to begin.
And it makes complete sense, I guess. And what strikes me as interesting with this kind of thing is, even if you look at that kind of tripartite division of sort of bards, obates, and druids, because I think it originally comes from Strabo, the geographer. One of the things he says is that, like, the druids' primary role is as moral philosophers. So they talk about like their main role in society is to ask about morality, to ask about what it means to sort of give like ethics, and like what it means to live a good life, what it means to live connectedly, right? So we're talking about morality. And coming down, I guess, and connecting to this system that we're in, whether it's the earth, whether it's the society that we're in, whether it's the culture, whatever it is, like a lot of our, even more generally, a lot of our ethics, a lot of our morals arise from observing nature, observing culture, observing people, right? In that way, they are completely more moral philosophers. And like we said, the transmigration of souls and reincarnation is a belief that was also present among the Druids as well. And yeah, there's never really this understanding that they will, they'll reincarnate and transcend out of the body, like they're reincarnating and coming back to the body every now and again. Or they're coming back every time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just beautiful. It's incredible. Well, so with that, I guess we can wrap up, I guess. Well, thank you for the beautiful meditation too. I'm sure that's going to be very lovely for people.
Thank you, Chris. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
You too.